So, very warm welcome to all our participants. I hope you and your family are all safe and sound. Thank you so much for joining in today. Well, it's a lovely monsoon afternoon, and we are all set to begin with our today's webinar. By 2025, the HR industry will have been able to use technology and people analytics to move towards thought leadership, a focus on real-time performance reviews and purposeful creation of a diverse workforce will shape best practices. HR must become incredibly flexible to adapt to this dynamic landscape. Personalized learning delivered through mobile devices can help employees keep up with changing skills requirement. Further, tools to govern the remote workforce without hampering engagement or productivity will be critical to the future of HR. And as we begin to learn that the gig workforce is here to stay, HR will have to develop skills to manage this diverse workforce, learning additionally how to choose the best technology to handle such a workforce. What is the future of HR? Let's hear it from our expert today, who will be sharing with us his learnings. HR Association of India welcomes you all to the 2021 Dialogue Masterclass series on the topic, The Future of Modern HR. To know more about HRAI and its event, I would request all our participants to visit the link and details posted in the chat window. I request all the participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines mentioned in the chat window. It would be great to have all the participants' feedback. We'll be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all the participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our master for today, Mr. Shakun Khanna, HR leader, digital HR transformation advisor. Mr. Shakun is a highly sought after HR transformation expert in Asia and serves as the head of HCM application strategy, JAPAC, at Oracle Corporation. Prior to joining Oracle, he was the country head of Right Management India. In his earlier role, he has been the head of IBM Smarter Workforce and leader of employee engagement and leadership development practice for Gallup Consulting. He also co-founded Consentious Advisory, a specialty transformation consulting firm. Over the last 2 decades, he has been a consultant to many Fortune 500 organizations on areas of digital HR transformation, talent management, organization design and development, employee experience, leadership development, and succession planning. Shakun carries rich experience of managing businesses for global organizations in various leadership roles. An accredited executive coach, Shakun is also a master facilitator of the consciousness-based leadership with the International Center of Contemporary Consciousness. An inquisitive traveler and an avid reader, Shakun is greatly inspired by Dr. Stephen Covey and Donald O. Clifton, which instills in him a great passion to transform organizations for betterment of their human capital. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. The link for the same has been shared in the chat window. I now hand over the platform to Mr. Shakun. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Peterson, and welcome all. Thanks for taking time out. I know it's just Tuesday today, and we are just in the beginning of the week. So thanks for the opportunity and taking time out. Now, as Peterson, you said, the world of work is evolving very, very significantly and very rapidly. The role of HR has significantly changed currently. And we are yet to settle down the dust, of this pandemic, which has created this kind of a permanent impact on HR specifically. I mean, the world of work definitely has changed by and large, but specifically HR has changed. The role of HR has significantly changed. The role technology is playing in driving HR has significantly changed. And therefore, the role that HR professionals will have to play going forward will also undergo a change. Now, whenever there is a change, it will mean that we need to reskill ourselves. It will mean that we need to realign our work methodology. And in this case, we also will have to realign our thinking and total outlook towards the jobs that we do, the roles that we play, and the function that we do. So I thought what will be interesting for us to today talk about is what is the future of HR? Where are we headed from here? What is next in the field of HR? Uh, I'll talk about this topic in two sections. First 10-12 minutes I'll talk about what is happening in the macro environment. How is the world out there changing? What are the implications of those changes for work? And therefore, what are its implications on the way HR will have to look at adding value to the business? The next 10 minutes or so I'll spend talking about, therefore, what are the new skill sets, what are the new capabilities, and what are the new behavioral patterns that we as HR professionals will have to develop going forward, and how do we go about that? I want to keep it very, very open and very interactive, so to say. Peterson, if you allow, I would invite people to just keep on asking questions as we go along. Of course, we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. But since we have the luxury of time today, we have blocked an hour or so, and I see we have about 25, 30, 36 people now, which is a good number. I'm happy to take any questions, right? So let them keep coming in chat. If some of you can look at chat and prompt any question that you feel is relevant, I'll be happy to take it there and then. If there are questions that I'm not able to take, I will take it at the end of the session. And if there are questions that we are not able to answer, then collectively we will kind of find answers in the next few days and revert back to this group. For those of you who are interested in this topic, you may follow me on LinkedIn. I also run a YouTube channel called For Work Talks. So if you just type my name or For Work Talks, there I invite multiple global leaders to talk about everything that matters in future of work. So I will invite you all to kind of subscribe to that channel as well. Now, it's been over 18 months that this pandemic started. And the truth is that we are now all attuned to a new way of working. We all will know that there is a principle of 21 days or 21 weeks in habit formation. We are perhaps very near to getting into the 21st month of working in a very unstructured, yet a very disciplined and a very disrupted way of life. This is something that will continue. Not only that, it's a very interesting thing that many of you would have heard about this very latest thing that is happening, which is called as the Great Resignation. Let me see, and people can chat in. How many of you all have heard this term called the Great Resignation? Type into the chat so that I know how many of us have heard that. Otherwise, I'll assume that nobody has heard it, and perhaps maybe I can spend a minute or two. Okay. One person says no. Okay. That means, okay. All right. So let me talk about this. I have not prepared a slide per se on that, but this is something which is very new. It has just come up. Now, before I get into that, so what happened was that HR is always handling change. It is handling disruptions in the business. It's a way of life for us. But this time around, perhaps for the first time in the history, this transformation is not going to work. So when we look at the future of HR, I say that future of HR or future of modern HR is not transformation. We've been talking about transformation for maybe 5, 7, 10 years now. And suddenly this disruption has kind of completely disrupted, and therefore there is no scope of transformation. Future of HR is in reinvention. That means that everything that we are doing so far needs to perhaps go out of the window and a new way of thinking, new outlook, new processes, new systems. Everything has to be reinvented. The reason I emphasize so much on reinvention is because this time around the the shift or the change that we are grappling with is three-dimensional. Remember, in the past, there was always a single dimensional change and we managed that well. But this time around, three dimensions of the business are changing. On one side, the businesses are getting disrupted. There is no industry today, there is no industry today that has not seen some or the other form of disruption. Now, of course, there are industries that are hugely disrupted, and then there are industries that are marginally disrupted. But disruption is something which is common. The ones that are not disrupted are perhaps waiting because very soon, the traction that is building in the startup world, the technology that is catching up, and the way people are working, those industries will also get disrupted. So that means that business models are changing. It is anticipated that an average business model now has a shelf life of about 3 years. Earlier, it used to be 10 to 12 years, so that's the kind of disruption in the business models that has happened. The other dimension of disruption is the disruption of the work models. Today, one can choose to work from home, work part-time, work few days in a month, work few hours, work for multiple organizations at a time, work as a gig, work in multiple domains and careers, and so on and so forth. It is anticipated that people who are starting their careers now, by the time they retire, they would have had 7 different careers and on an average about 20 different jobs. So therefore the average shelf life of a particular work model is very, very small as well. Gone are those days that when you would start an employment and continue to be employed throughout your life unless and until you decided to become an entrepreneur. So those were the only two things. Now what will happen, it will keep on changing. People will get down the employment bus, they'll start something, perhaps work as entrepreneurs for a couple of years, then come back, go on a part-time mode, and so on and so forth. So work models are changing. Therefore, HR policies, systems, processes have to be reinvented to suit those work models. The third and the most complex dimension is that individual aspirations are changing. People today want a different work experience. They are seeking different work standards, work environments, and work arrangements from their employer. And this is also the trigger for the Great Resignation. In the US, in the last 35 to 40 days, 40 million people have resigned from their jobs. It is anticipated that about 50 to 60% of the population is actively looking to change their jobs now. And therefore, this term, the Great Resignation, has surfaced in the last about 40, 45 days or so, because it means that everybody seems to be resigning, right? That they are changing jobs. The reason is that before the pandemic, people were somehow navigating, right? People were somehow living their lives because they were attuned to a way of work and they did not feel that there was a way out of it. So long commutes, obscene working hours, substandard technology support, differentiated benefits, and those kind of things were common workplace practices. During the last 18 months or so, people have really got bored, right? They realize that perhaps they can't change where they live, perhaps they can't change their families, they can't change the environment, what is happening with the pandemic, but they can certainly change their work life, right? The way they work, they can change because there are many more options out there. So therefore, everybody seems to be seeking a change. Even if you look at in India or in our part of the world, there has been a significant momentum in job creation and job changes. So there is a lot of change happening. Now, clearly, organizations that are not ready to adapt, and this all got triggered when In the US specifically, organizations started calling people back to work, and they said, okay, we will go back to our original way of working from offices. Everybody needs to show up. That's where this shakeup happened. People realized, hey, I don't want to go back to that rut anymore, and I want to work in a different manner. One very interesting research that is coming out is that hybrid is going to be the way of work going forward, which means that every organization and every function and job has to have some kind of flexibility. Early research is showing that working 2 days remotely and about 3 days from the office is the most optimum arrangement, but we don't know yet, right? So that's an interesting piece. So that's the great resignation, which I thought I'll spend a bit of a time. Now, because of this, disruption, what has happened for the HR fraternity is that the fundamental tenets on which HR is based are also shifting. Now, there are three tenets on which the entire human resource function was created. When I say tenets, it means fundamental beliefs or fundamental principles. The first principle was that we know what we need for our business. So HR leaders would go and tell, okay, if this is the kind of work that you want to do, you need a sales professional, or you need a marketing professional, or you need a brand manager, or you need a machine operator, and so on and so forth. Because the understanding was that HR and people dealing with people know what they need for their business. What is very interesting and ironical about today's world is we don't even know what do we need for our businesses. If you, for example, run an IT company today, it is very difficult for you to predict what skills you need because you don't know what new programming languages or what technologies will come and disrupt. If you run a bank, for example, you don't know what skills you will need because you don't know whether branches will increase or everything will become digital. So therefore, should you hire more of computer engineer or a front office desk staff? So this fundamental tenet that we as HR professional know what we need for businesses kind of whacked and it is out of the window. The other tenet was that jobs are predictable, which means they are composed of fixed task-based work, right? You show up at a place, you do some work, and then you go and get paid accordingly. That is again changing. Students of medicine have acted like doctors already, right? Very young junior people have started multi-billion dollar startups in the tech world, and they are disrupting the world. A lot of work that was traditionally done by human beings is kind of getting to the bots. So the other thing is that we don't even know what are the jobs, which jobs will remain, which will not remain, right? If you look at hospitality industry, who would have predicted that a Zomato would create a 1 lakh crore valuation out of, people who are delivery boys and not restaurant managers or chefs or front office and back office staff. That's completely changed. So in hospitality industry, for example, nobody would have predicted what is the kind of job. So now, unless and until as HR teams, you are able to predict what kind of jobs are required, this fundamental tenet does not work. In fact, it is said that HR leaders now have to create organizations to run businesses that don't exist and develop skills that we don't even know, right? So that's the kind of ambiguity. The third and the most important tenet was that people are fungible, which means that you can replace one person with another person. And that's why, it was called human resource. They used to always say that, organizations are not dependent on one person or few people. Somebody goes, you will find some other person. The reality is that in a lot of cases, it is being realized that people are not fungible. Everybody has unique capabilities, and those capabilities are not replaceable apple to apple. When you find a replacement for someone in some job, there are new qualities that he or she brings in, and there are certain qualities that the incumbent had, which they will not. So if you look at it, all these three principles or pillars on which HR was based has fundamentally changed. And therefore, as I said, future is not about transformation, it's about reinventing everything. Now, because all these three things are not in existence anymore, we'll have to completely reinvent. Now, because these three tenets are shifting or changing, there are 4 or 5 fundamental shifts that are happening in the world of work. So, what are these? The first shift is essentially around the composition of workforce. If you look at about, say, 4 or 5 years ago, there were two types of employees: full-time employees and part-time or contractual workers. That's about it. There was no third category, right? So either you had to be a full-time employee or you would be a part-time or a contractual employee, and that's about it. Large chunk of it, majority of it, especially for white collar jobs, were full-time employees. Today, if you look at it, you could have remote workers, you could have full-time employees, you could have bots, you could have part-time employees, you could have returning employees, you could have gig workers, you could even have machine workers. There are a lot of companies that have deployed bots. I was reading an interesting, I was watching an interesting video where one of the banks in India has created a bot, right? So you go on their website, like we are talking to each other on a video call, you will be able to talk to a specific person. Now, interestingly, that person is not a person, it's a bot. So imagine a few years down the line, you invite a speaker and you don't know whether I'm a real human being or I'm a bot, right? And the augmented reality, virtual reality, the technology is such that you will not be able to. And I will try and send it, or you find that out on the web. That there is this bot who talks to you like a person, and you don't even realize whether you are talking to a real person or not. So composition of the workforce has changed. So therefore, what happens now is that, say, for example, if you had a CFO job in your mind, you can break that CFO role into multiple parts and get different work done from different types of workers, and then bring them all together. So suddenly the competency framework for a CFO role could completely change. And that's a big shift that is happening. Clearly, there are certain jobs that are totally gone to the boards. There are jobs that are totally going to gig workers or part-time workers. There are jobs in each organization that remote workers can do. And then there will be few jobs for which you need full-time employees for one purpose. Obviously, it'll have implications on your policy framework, your compensation framework. How do you manage performance? How do you attract the talent? How do you leverage technology? How do you leverage data? Just about every aspect of HR will shift or change or get reinvented because of this shift, right? The next shift, and I'm happy to take any questions as we go along. And the next shift is the shift from competencies to skills. Now, I just gave you an example of a CFO role, right? CFO role had multiple competencies. It was a very complex competency framework. A competency is comprised of multiple capability, right? Now, capabilities are created by individual skills. So what happens is, if you look at it, a person may be having great selling skills, for example. Now, selling skill is not one skill. It will have negotiation skill as one skill. It will have communication skills as another skill. Networking perhaps as another skill. Presentation as another skill. And within, say, communication, there could be written communication, verbal communication, listening, and so on and so forth. So each skill is very, very granular now. Now, because there are multiple options available for the kind of workforce that we can have, the world is shifting from a competency framework to a skill-based framework, which essentially means that I have a task to be done. You have one skill. Why don't you do it and we will figure it out? So today, if you look at it specifically in the gig marketplaces, people can monetize just one skill and make a decent living. They don't really have to worry about developing full competencies, right? So somebody who's not very effective in communication, but is a great graphic designer, will not fail that interview simply because he could not do well in a GD or in an interview scenario. or in a arcane entrance test of sorts, and still make money out of leveraging that one skill he or she has, i.e., the graphic design. So therefore, the next piece is that how do you then uh, redesign and reinvent all HR systems and processes to become now skill focused and not just competency focused, right? So that's a big scale shift that is happening. The third shift is around customization to personalization, right? And this is very interesting because earlier there were customizations that can be done. So imagine that you go and buy a trouser, a pair of trousers, or a pair of jeans from a ready-made garment shop, right? The person will be able to customize it for you. Maybe reduce the length of a trouser. That's the usual thing. Maybe tighten it up a bit. That's about it. But when you go to a tailor, then it is personalization. That the trouser is created only for you, keeping in mind for you. So far, HR policies, HR benefits, HR structures, job descriptions were customized for certain groups of people. That is not working anymore. Each and every individual member of the organization today may have a unique requirement. Somebody might say that I want to work from, not necessarily in Ahmedabad, but outskirts of Ahmedabad. I have a farmhouse. I want to go and work from there. I don't want to live in the city anymore, which is a very big shift that is happening. Somebody might say that I will not work on Tuesdays and Wednesdays because I go for my guitar classes. Somebody else might say that, I've got a small kid at home, so I will only work on weekends, and so on and so forth. So there will be millions of permutations and combinations that will come up. And people will demand those things. People will not compromise now anymore, simply because they will find choices elsewhere. If you as an organization don't allow that personalization, somebody else will do it. Because see, today, if you look at it, if people use, say, a Facebook, it is personalized. If they use Twitter, it is personalized. They use Instagram, they use Google, everything is personalized to their lifestyle, their choices, their interest, and so on and so forth. Now that personalization is coming into the benefits, the HR policies, the employment contract, and so on. So the third shift that all of us as HR leaders will have to bear in mind and adapt to is this whole aspect of uh, personalization. In fact, from personalization, we are now moving into a zone of what is called as hyper personalization, which means that you really cater to the need of an individual member of the organization and not just the groups of members, right? In fact, from a policy perspective, I say that in future, the only viable policy for future is that of no policy. In simpler terms, it means that there cannot be any policy that is so rigid that it cannot be changed. Of course, there is a law of land, there are regulatory and compliance requirements. They will remain, they'll continue to remain, right? But outside of it, we've had various policies, we have a leave policy, we have a travel policy, or we have a attendance policy or a dress code policy. So all these policies have to be very, very adaptable. They have to be very, very flexible. If they are not, then people will not choose those organizations as their preferred organization. So therefore, the only viable policy would be that of no policy. The next shift, ladies and gentlemen, is about dashboards to deep dives when it comes to analytics. HR analytics is a very big thing. Many years ago, I used to work for Gallup, right? And there we used to create analytics reports, which means that we will come and do an employee engagement survey. Some of you would have participated in that, or your organizations would have participated. Then we will take 2-3 months, and after 2-3 months we will come and present you the reports of that survey. Now, one of the important concern or big concern or big pain point at that time was that everybody would say that, yeah, this is fine, but this is a report of data taken 6 months ago or 3 months ago. My organization has changed. Some of these people have left. Some of them have got promoted. Some of them have changed jobs. So how do I know what is happening today? You are telling me this was happening 4 months ago or 5 months ago. So how do I know what is happening today? So therefore, dashboards were born. So we said, okay, we'll not take 3, 4, 5 months. We will give you a dashboard there, and then you can see what is the score. And therefore, a lot of organizations spent a lot of money on sophisticated softwares that can create very nice looking HR dashboards. Ironically, the life of HR dashboards is also over. Now, nobody wants to look at good looking dashboards. People want to look at deep dive and insights coming out of data. Don't tell me that 30% of my people are high risk on attrition, or don't tell me 20% of my people are highly engaged. Tell me what is going to happen, what will happen. So if you are telling me that 30% people will, they are at a high risk of attrition, so therefore we can lose market share by this thing, and therefore if we do this X, what is the insight, what is the solution, uh, that's the kind of deep dive people want. People don't want, because when it comes to data and analytics, the deeper you go, the more granular it becomes. Unfortunately, analytics tends to combine things and tell you high level patterns which we don't really know, right? It's like the COVID thing. We don't know whether COVID is good or bad situation out there. If I have somebody in family, then it's very bad for me. If nobody in my family or in my circle is impacted, then I would say it doesn't matter that what is the number of cases out there. So from an HR analytics perspective, the world is moving towards deep dives, and people have to keep that in mind. So therefore, the HR priorities are changing. I talked about these four shifts. So because of these four shifts, what CEOs, business leaders, and promoters and boards are looking from HR professional is also significantly changing. Majority of the people expect HR to respond with much more agility. How do you drive leadership, culture, employee experience, specifically in a distributed kind of a workforce, is very, very critical and important now. This wasn't the priority many years ago. Earlier they would say driving compliances, enhancing performance and productivity of people, timely recruitment of people, growth and development. Those were the HR priorities. But now it is completely changed. In fact, this time around, HR played the most important role in taking businesses out of this crisis situation, because this time it was all about people. It wasn't about technology like the Y2K crisis, for example, or it wasn't about financial, engineering or re-engineering like the earlier depressions that we have seen in the early or late 90s or thereafter, right? So this time it is clearly about people, and therefore HR has been on the driver's seat as the world has kind of come out of this situation. So what does this mean for modern HR, right? So in the next 10-15 minutes, I will talk about what are therefore the skills and the shift that we require in ourselves as HR leaders, as our professionals, and people who want to create long-term career in HR. But before I move forward, once again, if there is any question on whatever I have covered so far, I will be very happy to take it now. Peterson, is there any question, comment, or anybody would like to say anything?
Not really. We do not have any questions as of now. We can proceed ahead.
Okay, interesting. So that can mean only two things. Either whatever I'm saying is making no sense to everybody, or it is very clear that everybody is understanding? I'll assume that everybody is with us and kind of move forward. So, uh, HR roles are evolving. Some of the roles, if you look at how HR function started as the personal department or the industrial relations department. During the days of unions, the job of HR was to essentially make sure that the industrial relations are managed. Now that nobody cares about these days anymore. There are hardly any unions and there is hardly any IR work happening out there. So of course, there is a difference. Cognizant has published a very interesting report. If those of you who have not seen this report, I will very strongly recommend that go on Google and download this Future of HR report. They say that in the next couple of years, there will be 21 new HR jobs that will emerge that don't exist today. And some of these are mentioned here, like, for example, chief climate response leader, work environment architect, uh, human biases officers, right? There's this whole focus on heuristics and biases, work from home facilitator, algorithm bias auditor. As machine learning kicks in, algorithms can be biased. Head of business behavior, for example, chatbot and human facilitator. All these jobs, if you look at it today or a couple of months ago, if not years, were unheard of. There are organizations that have appointed people like chief wellness officers or chief happiness officers. So those kind of roles are emerging. And while we are talking on the roles, there is a question which says from Sarthak that does the new type of HR need means that HR leaders of future would have had line experience rather than recruited straight into HR? I think this is a brilliant question, and the answer to this is yes. HR leaders of future must have a very strong business understanding, business orientation. Now, whether they should be recruited straight or they should be only from line, I mean, that is something that is debatable. But clearly, if you look at some of the biggest CHROs in the country today, Dr. Santrupt Mishra, for example, of ABG, uh, he also is the CEO of one of the business of Aditya Birla Group, right? Uh, so clearly, there are organizations that are now preferring people from their business or business background to be their chief HR officers or migrating into HR. For those of you who are fresh and young here and you have a long-standing career in front of you, even if you want to build a career in HR, I would very strongly recommend that spend a year or two, and if possible more, running the business. It could be in the sales function, it could be in the operations function. So that is certainly going to add much more value to the CV going forward. Right? I hope, Peterson, you will put the recording somewhere because somebody has a question. Can you watch it later? I'm assuming it is.
Yes, yes. We do have this live on YouTube, as well as we'll be having the recordings for the same. We'll share the link in the chat box later.
Therefore, what is the first skill or quality that we will need in HR professional is the business acumen. Unless and until an HR professional knows, understands, and predicts business better than the people who are running the businesses, he or she will not be regarded and respected for the value that he or she is capable of bringing to the table. Right? So that's a very important piece. And that's why I was, in a moment ago, I was saying that it's important for you to go and spend some time in the business, ideally running a business role. If not possible, spend as much time as possible. Some of the very good management trainee programs that are there in the country today actually make sure that during the management trainee phase, the person has a very good understanding of the business dynamic. In a company like Hindustan Lever, frontline sales is something that everybody gets exposed to, irrespective of the function they are in. So having that business acumen is very, very critical. Traditionally, HR professionals have not been acknowledged or respected for the kind of business acumen that they carry, right? We've been good at assessments, good at recruitment, good at behavioral sciences, all that is good. But business acumen is clearly going to be the first key. The second piece is around growth mindset. Now, growth mindset is not just having ambition and wanting to grow, right? So that is one aspect of growth mindset. But growth mindset is the mindset of disruption. There was a saying that if it ain't, don't fix if it ain't broken. That saying perhaps is outdated now. You have to break things in order to reinvent things. You have to constantly proactively disrupt your own business models, otherwise external forces will disrupt. We've seen it, for example, in the automobile industry, right? None of the companies wanted to really go and break that. There were fossil fuel cars, petrol diesel cars that were running and becoming better and better and better and better. Had Teslas of the world not disrupted the market, or new players like Apple or Google not started dreaming big in automobiles, other companies, traditional automobile companies, may not have really disrupted them. So the growth mindset would be about questioning what you are doing and how can you change that, right? This morning I read a news uh, saying that Amazon wants to acquire Inox. They want to acquire theaters, which is very interesting because nobody would have thought that, that's a logical business decision for them. But that's an example of growth mindset, that how is it and what is it that you need to do to augment your business and disrupt it yourself without waiting for external forces to work. And that's why, companies that have had this kind of a mindset. For example, many years ago, companies like IBM or Google started this flexi working. Today, every organization is forced to do this because the environment is such. But pioneers have had the growth mindset and therefore they have done things like that. So, question, what is that growth mindset? To me, that growth mindset is about constantly questioning the status quo. The third big and most important skill for HR professionals going forward would be influencing for impact, not for compliance. Most of the work will now start happening in virtual teams, so where you may not really have a positional authority. We have this concept of HR BPs, HR business partners, who are not really, HR heads or bosses, but they are like partners. And therefore, having an ability to impact through influence rather than through position is going to be extremely critical. Gone are those days when one could, you know, uh, uh, just throw around the weight of being in HR team to get the things done. If you cannot influence people by bringing the value that you can to the business and therefore creating real business impact in their lives, in their businesses, your influence is going to get diluted. So therefore, influence for impact will be the third key skill that every leader, every HR professional must invest in and invest in right now. Now, technology and data fluency, these were additional skills that were desired skills maybe about 2 years ago. But today, if you look at it, the world has become digital first. So if you are not tech savvy, if you are not fluent in data and interpreting of data and understanding the data, it's like missing out on hygiene factors. right? So unless and until each and every today every job is a tech job, right? So you can't run a taxi company without being able to it's very interesting. uh, a year and a half ago, I was working on the employee value proposition and employer branding strategy for a company, and they wanted to really hire people, as drivers. It is like Uber, one of the companies like Uber or Ola, which is like an app-based technology. This company. Now, it's very interesting. If you and maybe some people can chat, type this answer. I'm going to ask you a question. If you have to hire drivers and you have to drive hundreds and thousands of drivers, you have to hire them, what is the first skill that you will need to see in people that you want to hire? What is the first skill to become a driver? What is the bare minimum skill? Type out the answers, anybody. What is the bare minimum? What is the first basic fundamental skill that people need to have if they were to be hired as drivers? License, very good, of course, obviously. Driving skills, Tushar, yeah. I mean, unless and until a person knows how to drive, uh, how will they become a driver, right? But interestingly, this is not the case. This company in question said that actually we need people who know how to operate a smartphone so that they can understand how to navigate and they can understand how to accept knowledge of GPS. Yeah, you know. And then they said driving we will teach them. Actually, on the contrary, if they already know driving, so in places like India, they are bad drivers. They're not disciplined. They're not good drivers, because in India you get driving license without learning how to drive, and that's why we are so rash. And this is a complete paradigm shift. So in order to become a driver, you need to understand technology and how to operate a smartphone, and then you can get there. And that's what is changing. And therefore, any job is a technology job today, and the same would apply for say a Zomato delivery boy, or for a CEO for that matter, and even HR professional. So unless and until you don't have the uh, technology and data fluency, you're going to miss out. It's like somebody might say, "Oh no, I don't like Google Maps, and I will not use it." Okay, fine, you may not use it, but then you will miss out on the entire thing, right? You will not be able to predict when will you reach. You will not be able to select the right route, and so on. So tech and data fluency is very, very important. Similarly, gut feel has no relevance in business today. Everybody that you talk to will talk about what is the data backing your statements or what you're saying. So that is going to be important, right? And before I move forward, there's a question from Sahil. He says, today, as we can see, that more startups are driving into the market, how HR should deploy their employee branding strategy? I think this is a very important question. Employer branding now has to get hyper personalized, as I said earlier. You know, gone are those days when you will attract people by telling them how great you are as a company. Today, if you look at, and if you actually look at the recruitment ads and what some of these big companies are talking about now, they are not talking about how great they are anymore, but they are talking about what can you do for the company, what kind of lifestyle you can live by joining this company, what are the privileges that you can get, what are the learnings and exposure that you can get, right? So that's the right. So therefore, employer branding strategy has to completely change from a uh, self projection to actually becoming a preferred place for other people to come and achieve their dreams and aspiration, and of course in the process create a success for the business, right? The last thing is about this. I've talked about 4 shifts and 4 new skills that HR leaders will have to do. Clearly, as we look at this whole uh, reinvention of HR and reset of the workplace, as they say, and of course the great resignations that are happening, I think it is time for us to step back and reset the expectations that we have from our roles, from our stakeholders, from the environment, from the talent we lead. I mean, it's just about resetting the expectation. Revisit your policies, your processes, your tools, your technology. Anything that is not future ready, anything that is not up to date, anything that is not world class, anything that is not disruptive in nature is not going to survive in the future. And lastly, it is about reinventing. How can you reinvent the policies, the processes, the mindset, even your own self as an HR professional? That will be very, very critical. So as I said, HR is not transforming anymore. In order to survive, HR will have to reinvent itself, and therefore it's the time for reinvention. So those are the four shifts and those four skills, if I may, that we will need to drive the future of modern HR, right? I'll kind of pause here and happy to take any more questions, any comments, any suggestions, anything that comes to your mind.
So before we move into the question and answer session, what we will do is we'll be initiating a poll to capture the feedback of our participants. So would request all our participants to share their feedback on the poll that is launched. While you're sharing the feedback, would request all our participants to share the questions pertaining to our today's session in the chat box. Our speaker would be happy to respond to those questions. Once again, I thank all our participants for joining our session today. We have received a lot of inquiry about the e-certificate offered by HRAI. You can claim your certificate by sharing your details. When I say details, it's your name and the session that you have attended in an email to the email ID provided in the chat window. Please ensure to do the same and share the same by 31st of July 2021. We will email the e-certificates to you based on details received.
Oh, sorry, did I click the wrong button?
Well, so we have received a question at the time of registration. I would like to read them out to you. Uh, with the rapid change in how business function, how does the perfect HR department look like? What do you think the relevance of a conventional HR practice would look like in the future?
So I think the perfect HR department for future would be an imperfect HR department. Because you will never be able to achieve that status where everything is working, because you will be constantly reinventing. So if you are full of imperfections, you are mindful of those imperfections, and you're constantly working towards it, I think that will be a perfectly imperfect HR department. On the relevance of the traditional policies, I think I have spoken a lot. I even went up to the extent of saying that the future policy is that of no policy. So any policy that is very rigid and that cannot be changed will be detrimental to the interest of the business, and therefore you should not have it. One thing is there, that in the worlds that we live in, the technology, the products, processes will never be perfect, because suddenly if you see, we are now in a zone where there are versions coming out. And it's not that because there is something bad in that. When an iPhone came in, iPhone was very good. But it is the growth mindset of the company that said, oh, it's not good enough. We'll not stop it here. We'll go to the next one. We'll go to the next one. We'll go to the next one, right? So they are constantly disrupting, and therefore the market is growing. I don't know how many of you know a product called a rice cooker, right? So there is a product called rice cooker. A few companies make it. Now I have a rice cooker which is about 25 years old. at my place. I had bought it 25 years ago. One day I thought that this has become very old. I mean, it is properly functioning, and I thought that chalo naya lete hain, I mean, rice cooker would have become something better. Now it's so interesting and sad that the rice cooker has not changed at all. It is exactly the same product. Therefore, I looked at it and I decided there is no point buying the rice cooker because it has not evolved and changed. Therefore, the rice cooker market is very small in the world because they're just not changing it. They're just not, you know, and you may want to check out if you don't know, because in India we don't use those many rice cookers. But that's the point. So there will be no perfection. If you feel that my rice cooker is perfect, yes, it will be perfect, but it will not grow. The growth mindset means that you will find out something that you need to do with the rice cooker, like iPhone is doing with their phones. Apple does something, they come up with a new phone, which we don't need, but we all go and buy, and that creates trillions of dollars worth of business for everybody. So that's the difference there.
To grow, you need to evolve. That's the whole concept behind it. So in order to grow, you need to definitely evolve yourself and adapt towards the new changes that come in. Rightly and well answered. So we have our next question. That's on when we talk of now and future, how our workplaces, jobs, and skills are changing. How can we remain relevant in tomorrow's HR world? I believe it's in same lines.
See how they are changing. Everything is evolving. Workplace is evolving very fast. Skills are becoming very, very small in their shelf life. So if you look at it, if you were a software engineer, you did a NIT course in a particular language in earlier days, it will take your career 10, 15 years. But today, every 2 years, 3 years, the languages are changing and you have to constantly keep on learning new things. So the first thing is that the shelf life of a skill is much more shorter today. The good news is that you can learn new skills very, very quickly. When I was in college, I wanted to learn baking, but I just could not because, it meant there was a teacher somewhere and you had to do a 1 week course and you have to go there and do that. Now I can open YouTube and start baking, which I did actually a few weeks ago, and I baked very good cakes, right? So that is the kind of thing. So one, the shelf life is very small. B, it is very easy and quick for learning. So, how can we stay relevant? Simply keep learning. I say that you should measure your learning health by this formula. Is there anything that you know something about that you did not know anything about 90 days ago? 90 days ago, you did not know anything about a particular topic. Today, you know something about that. That means you have learned something, so you are learning. Now, if you can't figure out a thing today that 90 days ago you did not know, trust me, you have not learned something new in 90 days, and therefore you are not keeping pace with the changing markets, I would say. Today, I believe it is 90 days. In days to come, maybe it could become 45 days, who knows?
Well answered, sir. Um, we'll take the last question owing to the time. Will gig economy completely change the existing employment pattern? What are the pros and cons of gig economy?
See, it will not completely change, but it will significantly change. It's like uh, look at this. When cameras came into phones, everybody thought that the cameras will go away. It did not happen. In fact, the DSLR market, the digital professional camera market has grown accordingly. But they've become very specialized. And I think that is what is going to happen with the gig economy. Gigs will come and they will start working. If you look at a lot of sector in India always worked like gigs, right? Whether it was carpenters, masons, they were always gigs, electricians. Now it is coming in the white collar space. So I think about 40 to 45% of the workforce will become gig workforce. Rest of it will continue. People who will continue definitely will get benefits, right? They will have far more flexibility, far more personalization, and all those 5, 6 things that I talked about.
Absolutely. Um, Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a PowerPex session with great insights and learning from you. Thank you for covering aspects of the Great Resignation, the gig workforce, the policy personalization, and the skills required in the future. Um, Best aspects is one needs to reset, revisit, and reinvent the aspects of learnings. It has been a pleasure being with you today. I'm sure our participants have had a lot to learn and take away from this session. Before we conclude with our today's session, we would also want to thank the association members, Geisha, NASCOM COE, LinkedIn Local, Talgro, TLE, WICCI, and GlipTalk for supporting these HRAI events. To know more about these associations, I request you to visit the link provided in the chat window. Thank you once again, dear speaker, and our participants for joining us today. Do join us for our next masterclass tomorrow on the topic Romancing Life, a session by Dr. Somya Badyan, VP Corporate Strategy, HR and IR on the 28th of July 2021. Request you kindly register for this event on the link mentioned in the chat window. Also to join the Dialogue 2021 WhatsApp chat group through the invite link shared in the chat window. That's it from us today. See you soon. Stay
Thank
safe,
you
take
all. It
care,
was a
and
pleasure
thank you.
being here. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Have
Thank
a
you
good
so
one.
much, sir. Thank you. Absolutely, Ashish. It has always been pleasure to hear him. Thank you, Raghavendra, for joining in. Thank you, Vandana. Thank you, Shyam. We hereby can conclude with our today's session.